Jubilee states that these things are sin, which is transgression of the law, leading to death. Number one, engaging war on the Sabbath. So let's test war on the Sabbath. The book of...
All right, so there's an underlying concept within Jubilees that it's speaking about doing these things for gain, just like it does in Exodus and Leviticus and Jeremiah and every other mention of the Sabbath and its instructions. It's about doing something for gain, for profit. Right? This is why in Exodus 35:4, speaking about do not light a fire on the Sabbath, you look up the definitions of the words used in there, and it says the word in the Hebrew is this word vocation. So it's talking about do not light a fire for your vocation. That's your job. It's not talking about for cooking a meal to live, to eat a meal that day, or if it's the dead of winter, lighting a fire to heat your home. It's specifically talking about kindling a fire for the purpose of your vocation, your work. That's because that's something that you gain profit off of, that you would have to engage in some sort of commerce off of. In the same way, in the ancient world, they used to make war for profit. They used to go out and make war to bring back the spoils of war. I know we've all heard this term before. And other times, the spoils of war, maybe the spoils of war was done just as a byproduct of going to war. But there was a reason you went to war. You're not a son of God who's interested in creating peace. You're going to war. So, of course, Sabbath being a reflection of the kingdom come, when the kingdom's here, nobody's going to be making war. So for you to go intentionally make war, we're not talking about self-defense. We're talking about intentionally making war against another nation. This is why it's an active verb. Whoever makes war on the Sabbath. You're inherently going to not only disrupt peace, be an aggressor, you're also going to have spoils that are be your profit. So just like Abraham in Genesis 14, when he went off to rescue Lot, out of the consequence of him making war against Chedorlaomer, comes back with a bunch of spoils, both of goods and people, to which he had to deal with all that, deal with all the details of all that. So this is why you're not instructed to make war on the Sabbath. Okay? That means actively fighting in order to take spoils.
Jubilee states conducting war on the Sabbath is a sin leading to death. So it says, whoever fasts or makes war on the Sabbaths, the man who does any of these things on the Sabbath shall die. Let's test that. The Battle of Jericho. And it came to pass on the seventh day, what is that? That they rose early about the dawning of the day and compassed the city after the same manner 7 times. Only on that day they compassed the city 7 times. So the people shouted when the priests blew with the trumpets. And it came to pass, when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they took the city. Listen to this. And they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, an ox and sheep and ass, with the edge of the sword. That was Joshua 6:15 and 20 through 21. Even though the text clearly states on the 7th day, meaning the Sabbath, one can make an argument that it wasn't the Sabbath.
Yeah, that is the argument we will have to make. Because there is nothing that says it was on the Sabbath. They were instructed, and I'm going to put this on screen, they were instructed to march around the city 7 times or 7 days, once a day for 7 days, and then 7 times on the 7th day. So it's an assumption that they began on the first day of the week and ended on the Sabbath. So let me go in here real quick to 1 second. Get this sorted. Okay. So let's go ahead and read the passage from Joshua 6. All right. Now Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. The Lord said to Joshua, behold, I've delivered Jericho into your hand, along with its king and its mighty men of valor. March around the city with all the men of war, circling the city 1 time. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns in front of the ark. Then on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times while the priest blows the horns. And then there is a long blast of the ram's horn, and you hear its sound. Have all the people give a mighty shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and all your people will charge straight into the city. So Joshua, son of Nun, summoned the priests and said, take up the ark of the covenant and have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns in front of the ark of the Lord. And he told the people, advance and march around the city with the armed troops going ahead of the ark of the Lord. And after Joshua had spoken to the people, 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns before the Lord advanced and blew the horns. The ark of the covenant of the Lord followed them. While the horns continued to sound, the armed troops marched ahead of the priests who blew the horns, and the rear guard followed the ark. But Joshua had commanded the people, do not give a battle cry or let your voice be heard. Do not let one word come out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. Then you are to shout. Did he tell the people, take your swords and attack the men of Jericho, the guards of the walls of Jericho? Take your ramparts and throw fiery balls filled with Greek fire into the walls of Jericho and flush them out? Did he tell them to throw spears at the guards of Jericho? Did any of the armed people actually use their arms? He tells them to shout. So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. The people returned to camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning. The priests took the ark of the Lord. The 7 priests carrying the 7 ram's horns kept marching ahead of the ark of the Lord and blowing the horns. The armed troops went in front of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord while the horns kept sounding. Now on the 2nd day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. Then on the 7th day, so here we are, verse 15. Then on the 7th day, is this a Sabbath? That's an assumption to say just because it uses the term 7th day in this sequence of them being told to march 7 days around this, that this is actually a Sabbath of the Lord. Yes, there's 7 days in a week, so eventually you're going to lapse past a Sabbath if you didn't start on the Sabbath or if you didn't start on the first day of the week. But let's just keep reading. They got up at dawn and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. This was the only day they circled the city 7 times. After the 7th time around, the priests blew the horns, and Joshua commanded the people to shout, for the Lord has given you the city. Now the city and everything in it must be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab and the prostitute and all those with her in her house will live, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the things devoted to destruction, lest you yourself be set apart for destruction. If you take any of these, you'll be set apart, the camp of Israel, for destruction, and bring disaster upon it. For all the silver and gold and all the articles of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They must go into his treasury. So when the ram's horn sounded, the people shouted. Then they heard the blast of the horn. The people gave a great shout. The wall collapsed. Then all the people charged straight into the city and captured it. At the edge of the sword, they devoted destruction to everything in the city, man and woman, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys. So again, it's an assumption that this took place on the 7th day. I would posit that the Father would not break his own rules about aggressing. And the reason, by the way, that's also assuming that this was an aggression and not an act of judgment. Again, there's a difference between making war and judging someone that God has decided their sins have caused judgment to fall upon them. So there's a difference, okay? Making war is not God judging the rebellious Amorites. So what's interesting is that in this concept here, a lot of people don't realize why at the beginning of Joshua chapter 6, the city of Jericho was closed off. It says it was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. So this is an interesting concept because in the book of Jubilees itself matches something that is explained outside of scripture from a Pharisaic rabbi, Josephus. So in the book of Jubilees, chapter 8, it explains that Noah gave to his sons and grandsons a portion of land. To Canaan, the son of Ham, Noah gave a portion of land in the southwest Africa continent. Some land, the southern part of Africa, the continent of Africa, next to the Atlantic Sea. Canaan did not like that land, and he wanted to go take what the Bible then refers to as the land of Canaan. That was a land that was given to Shem, according to Jubilees, where Noah gave that land to Shem, not to Canaan or to Ham. So remember, there's 3 different sons of Noah: Shem, Japheth, and Ham. They all had sons and grandsons. Noah is given out after the flood. Noah's given out portions of the destroyed earth that's regrowing. He's given out these large portions of land as inheritances to his sons and their grandsons. So as a hierarchical principle, the 3 sons of Noah get large portions of land, and within those portions, within the land of Ham that was given to Ham, his sons got divided up pieces within that. But Canaan decided he did not want the land that was given to him. Instead, he wanted Shem's land, specifically the land where the Garden of Eden used to be. So he wants to go up there and take it by sedition. He breaks the oath that they all made with Noah for this land inheritance. And the oath came with the consequence of death. They all agreed to this. They all of them. Canaan agreed that I will not take anyone else's land lest I be killed. Ham actually addresses his son Canaan in the story in Jubilees and tells him, do not do this. We made an oath in front of the holy judge, and the penalty for this is death. Canaan did not listen, and he went up and took his uncle Shem's land, specifically in what is then later referred to by the time the Israelites come out of Egypt and into the land of Canaan. It should be called the land of the land of Shem, but Canaan stole that portion of land from Shem and Shem's descendants. He took it through warfare. This is what's explained in Jubilees chapter 10, that the sons of the grandsons of Noah have begun to make war with each other. We also see they're still warring for this land all throughout the book, even up to the time of the book of Exodus. I mean, we even get a nod to this concept in the book of Exodus when they're coming out from Egypt. When the Israelites, Yahweh says, I will not take them along the sea, for they'll see war and they'll be scared. That was the utter sea line going into the bottom of what we would now call Israel, like going into the land of Canaan, which was occupied by the Philistines, the Amorites, the Hivites, and all those other clans. They were still warring for all that land. They're trying to drive out the sons of Shem. Josephus says they spent from the time that Abraham went in, or Abraham's sons with Jacob and the 75 went down into Egypt, until the time that the numerous children of Israel were brought out of the land of Egypt and back to the land of promise, the land of Canaan, which should have been the land of Shem. It was originally given to Shem. Canaan stole it by force, by warfare. Canaan made war to take this land. And the penalty for him breaking that oath amongst all of his brethren, his cousins and uncles, was he should have been killed. So everyone who continues in violating this oath is seditious, and the death penalty applies to them. This is why Yahweh says the sin of the Amorites is not yet full. They were in their mass wickedness, their malignancy. They're violating the oath they all made with Noah. Remember, Noah's still alive for 350 years after the flood. So Josephus in the 2nd century AD, in Antiquity of the Jews, talks about how the land of Canaan was being fortified with cities like we see in Joshua chapter 6. He explains why they all had these cities that had massive walls around them, and they had bombardments for warfare, and enclosed themselves because they knew the children of Israel were promised that land, and they knew the prophecy that they would be coming back. Josephus directly says, as a historian, whether you believe him or not, this was his 2nd century understanding as a Pharisee and historian of rabbinic Judaism. He claims this was their motivation, that the Canaanites who inhabited the land called the land of Canaan, they knew they were there by sedition, they knew they took it by force, they knew that they were descendants of those who had violated the oath that had been made to Shem and his descendants. That's why they wanted to keep it and protect it, defend it, and kick everyone out of it that was not a part of their coalition, of their empiric rebellion. And they knew the Israelites were destined to come back. So they started fortifying all their cities. This is the prequel information, if you will. This is the beginning information only given to us in the book of Jubilees that is validated by Josephus. Something to keep in mind. All right, so as far as making war on the Sabbath, that's an assumption. The text doesn't actually say that. Why are they even going into Jericho to begin with in the story? Why is Jericho shut up? Only Jubilees gives you that information, and Josephus validates that information in Antiquity of the Jews. This is why all of these were considered fortified cities.
Day. I'll give you that. However, Even if this was true, they certainly marched in war formation the other 6 days. One of them would have been the Sabbath, and for the purpose of making war. They were taunting.
They didn't make war. They didn't even say a word. They just walked. It's a very that's a difference. That's saying, oh, just because they walked beside a brothel, they went in, they're now guilty of engaging with a prostitute? No, they just said a word. They walked around the enemy's encampment. They didn't pull a sword out. They didn't even shout, which was the battle cry. This is why we read in Joshua chapter 6, Yahweh tells them, do not give out the battle cry. That means they're not announcing that they're making battle. So it's something to consider.
Essentially, they journeyed and engaged in an act of war on the Sabbath, which Jubilees laws prohibit. Remember, it says whoever strikes or kills anything.
Because remember, the idea of journey, going on a journey that Jubilees 50 and Jubilees chapter 2 talks about, is under the auspice of your vocation. If you're going for your job, right? Just like creating a fire for your vocation. It's the same concept as do not go hunt for your vocation. Do not go. We actually teach, though, that it makes a lot more sense with the rest of the canon that you would also not go out and procure at the marketplace or go hunt for your food and go draw your water, because that might require your servants to be working on the Sabbath. So get all that done before the seventh day and have your food and your water that you want to cook on the seventh day already inside your house and prepared so that you can make your food and stuff. We feel that the text clearly says that. But as far as going on a journey, it's not talking about just being able to travel. It's talking about the idea that you're not allowed to go on a journey pertaining to your business or vocation. I mean, we even see in the book of Acts that there was something that rabbinic Judaism had imposed on the people, which was a Sabbath day's walk, meaning they could just go out for a short span, which is like half a mile or whatever. Well, if you look at, so even if I were to take rabbinic Judaism's the days of Acts, their interpretation of a Sabbath journey, the Israelites were encamped on the other side of the Jericho, on the west side of the Jordan, excuse me, on the plains right next to Jericho. This is where they did the circumcision, and they had the hill of foreskins and everything. And then they were literally, the hilltop above them is the city of Jericho. So they've already crossed the Jordan. They're already into the quote unquote land of Canaan, and they're literally at the doorstep of Jericho, encamped around them with this massive army in the plains at the hillside at the bottom of Jericho. So they're less than half a mile from Jericho, even under the rabbinic, first century standards. But again, it's not about going on a journey just because you can't go for a walk in the woods, or you can't go see your family, or you can't go travel anywhere. This is not oral Torah. This is, you should not go on a journey for the sake of going to make profit for your vocation. That is the entire concept of do not work on the Sabbath. So what are the practical entailments that come up with do not work on the Sabbath? Let's say Jubilees was never even a book. What would you glean from do not work on the Sabbath from Genesis, Leviticus, Exodus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy? You were like, oh yeah, I can't go on a work trip. I can't go travel for the sake of my job on the Sabbath. I think everyone would conclude that. Yeah, you can't go on a journey for your work. No, we're not talking about just going to see people, or going to see family, or even going to help people. Right? What if your journey included you wanted to go do some sort of act of charity with somebody? Are you saying that I can't go across town to give food, or to go work at the mission, or to go help with help the elderly or whatever? Of course not. Of course not. It's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Even Christ teaches this. Again, it's all pertaining about the context of not doing work on the Sabbath.
Anything, right? Or whoever fasts and makes war on the Sabbath, the man who does anything, these things on the Sabbath shall die. Let's compare. The book of Joshua states they were commanded to destroy or kill on the seventh day and engage in war, for that matter of fact. Jubilee says.
Okay, so that's an assumption. So previously up in his written, whatever, I don't even know what to call it, his written article, he says, and some people claim that the seventh day is not talking about the Sabbath. And he says they got a fair point. But here in his conclusion, he's calling it the Sabbath. And that's just an assumption. So Just trying to be fair about it. The text doesn't actually say that. And I wouldn't assume that it is anyway.
Says whoever fasts or makes war or strikes or kills anything on the Sabbaths shall die. 1 Corinthians 14:33 says, for Elohim is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all assemblies of the saints. Let's continue about the war on Sabbath. So next, we're going to look at 1 Maccabees, which was included in the Greek Septuagint. The Greek Septuagint was the accepted Bible or canon during the times of Messiah. The Apocrypha of the 1611 KJV and many other Bibles. According to the testimony given in 1 Maccabees, initially, the Israelites wouldn't fight back on the Sabbath when the Greeks attacked and were consequently slaughtered. I mean, just annihilated. After some time, they realized something was wrong with this mindset and possibly man-made doctrine they were following. So they were...
Yeah, it's people have interpreted the Bible badly throughout all generations. Yep. Just like you had people interpreting in the days of Jeremiah. You had bad teachers, bad priests giving bad teachings to the point where the people say we inherited lies. In the future, the return of Messiah, people will say we inherited lies. Just like today, we see a lot of bad teachings. So in the same time, in the days of the Maccabees, I'm not going to say they had perfect doctrine either. Very, very likely they are seeing the effects of bad doctrine to where they're realizing, wait a minute, making war is different from defending yourself. So they're like, oh, yeah, we should defend ourselves so that the Greeks can't come in and just slaughter us wholesale. It's very different from going out to make war in order to aggress upon someone, to take land, to take profits, to take spoils of war. It's very different. Defending yourself is very biblical. Even Christ teaches that there'll be a time when men have to take up the sword. Self-defense is very biblical.
Staunchly like, hey, we're not going to fight back on the Sabbath. I wonder why. It's very possible they could have had access.
Okay, so he's about to make the inference that these people who didn't fight back on the Sabbath until they realized they should based their bad conclusion on the book of Jubilees. But that's just an inference, not stated in the text of Maccabees. And it's not stated in the text of Jubilees that you can't defend yourself. We see people defending themselves. Jacob in the book of Jubilees is defending himself with Esau and his sons attacking him. It's biblical to defend yourself.
To the precepts in Jubilees. So the Greeks attacked them, Israelites. The parentheses here is me adding just for context so you know who it's talking about. So the Greeks, attacked them, the Israelites, on the Sabbath, and they died with their wives and their children and cattle to the number of 1,000 persons. When Matthias and his friends learned of it, they mourned for them deeply, and each said to his neighbor, if we all do as our brethren have done and refuse to fight with the Gentiles for our lives and our ordinances, they will quickly destroy us from the earth. So they made this decision that day. Let us fight against every man who comes to attack us on the Sabbath day. Let us not all die as our brethren died in their hiding places. 1 Maccabees 2:38-41. I recognize some people don't consider this scripture. However, I think at least many people would consider this historical facts.
In the same way, the historian George Syncellus, the Greek historian in the 8th century, used Jubilees to make his chronography of the world, which is a history book of the world. George Syncellus, a world-renowned Greek historian, decided to use Jubilees to create his origins and histories of the world to his day, at least to the point in his day. It's not scripture, and he considered it a historical fact. In the same way, Josephus is explaining to you information you only get from Jubilees as a reason for what we see in Genesis through Deuteronomy and the conflict of Canaan as a historical fact.
So nevertheless, it says, or take a guess what happened after they committed to fight back on the Sabbath. Yahweh blessed them, and they utterly destroyed their enemies, every single one of them. Towards the end, of course, in the end, they got haughty and mixed with the nations again, but that's a whole other story. Nevertheless, truly, if Yahweh opposed war on the Sabbath, he would not have blessed them in continuous victory after making this decision.
What was the narrative you just read from First Maccabees? That if we're attacked on the Sabbath, we'll fight back. Not that we're going to go out on the Sabbath and make war on the Sabbath. Very different.
Also, to the Torah, Deuteronomy 10:10-12 says, when you come close to a city to fight against it, then proclaim peace to it. And it shall be, if it make you an answer of peace and open unto you, then it shall be that all the people that is found therein shall be tributaries unto you, and they will serve you. And if it will make no peace with you, but will make war against you, then you shall besiege it. When you besiege a town or city, it could last days, months, even years. The anxiety of war drags on endlessly until it's consummated. The point being is the Israelites would be in violation of Jubilees 50 if the siege lasted more than 7 days, which they usually do, some months, some years. As a siege is an act of war. Let's not forget Jericho and the 7 days. Jubilees, in my opinion, adds to Yahweh's Torah, which is a severe violation and shouldn't be taken lightly. Also, a reminder,
Okay. So I'm trying to be as gentle as possible with this, but there's a lot of assumptions built into these arguments. A lot of assumptions. So let's go back to Joshua. So in Joshua from chapter 6 to chapter 11, nowhere does it say that they attacked anybody on the Sabbath. Nowhere does it say that they put these cities to a 7-day siege or a multiple siege that lasted that long. And they warred against these cities for a long time, but nowhere does it say they actually did war on the Sabbath day and went against these cities on the Sabbath day. Now, even in the times where, like in Joshua 10, where these armies come out to battle against, the 5 kings come out to battle against Joshua, it doesn't say that this happened on the Sabbath. We clearly know that Joshua fought back. Even the Lord from heaven fought back in this way as well. But none of this stuff is said to be happening on a Sabbath day. And even if it did happen on the Sabbath day, in the likelihood that these Amorites were attacking Joshua and the Israelites, they would have the right to defend themselves even on a Sabbath day, even according to the book of Jubilees. Because the idea of making war is not self-defense. There's a difference. So I just want to leavenly, point out that there's some assumptions in some of these arguments. So this is what we've said earlier. Just want a reminder, just another reminder, that this is not the same as making war. God bringing judgment on somebody because they are oppressing your people and God is rescuing you. Remember, it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. So when God exacts judgment on the wicked, is that good? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. Would we call that righteousness? When Yahweh exacts judgment on the wicked, no matter what day of a week it is that righteous? I think we should say yes, right? I'm going to say yes. So yes, the first day of unleavened bread is a Sabbath, 100%. Yes, the last plague at midnight that happened, the death of the firstborn of the princes of Egypt, as well as the cattle and the livestock. Yes, that was a judgment for the wickedness and rebellion, for Pharaoh oppressing the innocent. Yahweh is judging a wicked person for his behavior. This is not Yahweh making war to take for the purpose of taking the spoils of Egypt. This is not that. This is not the purpose. Was not for that. It was to rescue, to deliver the oppressed whose cries had reached to him in heaven. This is very different than making war for profit.